We had been taught by colonialism that we were secondary, and we had imbibed that.
Welcome to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. This podcast is brought to you by the Bangalore International Centre. My name is Arshia, and I'm here with Anmol. We recorded these conversations with Girish right before his death in June 2019. In these episodes, we have a chance to listen to Girish's wide-ranging observations about his life and his work. Along with excerpts from his plays, we'll hear various people talk about his legacy as an artist and as a public intellectual.
With Karnad knew his theatre. Karnad was a theatre man. Like with Hayavadhana. When Hayavadhana, I had just read the transposed heads. And I said to Karnad one day when we were talking, there is this transposed head story. We must make a film, I said. Nice film. And Karnad said, Filma? Yake filmo? She, film gel medare. Natka madona. Natka bere now. In his usual fashion. So I said, my God, you're right. It's really material. I said, yes, you're right. It's good material for a play. And Karnad said, yes, not only will you write, I know you'll write within the next 15 days. And I wrote. Satyadev did it in Hindi. And Satyadev was taken by the fact, by one line in the play, where the horse says, I have become a horse, but I haven't got the language. And Satyadev was a Hindi wala. Today he would have been ideal on the front page. We are a country who never get out of a problem. We come back to it again. And this is exactly what was happening then. These idiots, RSS are doing exactly what Congress did then. 3-language formula. Anyway, I don't want to go into that. But what I mean is this. Satyadev loved it. So Satyadev did it in Hindi. And Karnad did it in Bangalore. And for the first time, we had used folklore, horses, masks, all this sort of thing. And this was hailed as the Natya Shastra re-enters. People were all waiting how to use traditional forms.
Hayavadhana is widely regarded as one of Girish's best plays, and it burst onto Indian stages in the early 1970s. No one ever forgets watching Hayavadhana, but the productions of the play that changed people's perceptions of what theatre could be were B.V. Karnad's Kannada production of Hayavadhana in Bangalore and Satyadev Dubey's Hindi production in Bombay. In this episode, we're delighted to be speaking with two Bombay theatre people, Shanta Gokhale, everybody's favourite theatre critic, who's been writing about the Indian stage for just about 50 years, and Sunil Shanbag, who's been making theatre ever since I've known him, which is a very long time. So Shanta, Sunil, you were both there for the moment when Dubey's production of Hayavadhana knocked people's socks off in Bombay. Was there really a big buzz? What was that like?
I was part of it. I went buzz, buzz, buzz. Yeah, it was mind-boggling experience because we hadn't had that sort of music, color, mythology on the Bombay stage. It was the first time I was seeing this. And for me, it was an introduction to Girish because I hadn't seen Yayati.
Sunil, you were terribly young, weren't you, when you saw Hayavadhana?
So I think it was the summer of 1972 or 1973, and I was in Bombay on vacation from school, and a friend told me about a performance of a play called Hayavadhana, directed by this very, very famous director, Satyadev Dubey. I hadn't really heard of him. And without any clue what I was going to see, I landed up there, and what was in front of us was this bare stage with fairly tacky black backdrop and things like that, and probably just one steel chair. So bare stage, no fancy lighting, just illumination. I would say 5 minutes into the play, I was completely blown by the magic that could be created in a space like this. And also then the play itself, I mean, it just struck me as so joyous and yet so profound, and whatever level I could understand at that time. That evening when I left and went back home, and I remember the long train journey back home, and I told myself, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Let's listen to something from this fabulous play. Hayavadana was published in English in 1975. Malika Prasad reads Padmini, and Kafil Jafri is Devadatta.
How he climbs like an ape. Before I could even say yes, he had taken off his shirt, pulled his dhoti up and swung up that branch. And what an ethereal shape. Such a broad back, like an ocean with muscles rippling across it. And then that small feminine waist, which looks so helpless.
She had so much to talk about all day. She couldn't wait for breath. Now, not a word.
He is like a celestial being reborn as a hunter. Now his body sways, his limbs curve. It's a dance almost.
And why should I blame her? It's his strong body, his manly muscles. And to think I had never ever noticed them all these years. I was an innocent, an absolute baby.
No woman could resist him.
No woman could resist him. And what does it matter that she's married? What a fool I've been. All these days, I only saw that pleading in his eyes, stretching out its arms, begging for a favor, but never looked in her eyes. And when I did, took the whites of her eyes for their real depth. Only now I see the depths. Now I see these flames leaping up from those depths. Now, so late. Don't turn away now, Devdatta. Look at her. Look at those yellow, purple flames. Look how she's pouring her soul into his mold. Look, let your guts burn out. Let your lungs turn to ash, but don't turn away. Look and don't scream. Strangle your agony. But look deep into those eyes. Look until those peacock flames burn out the blindness in you. Don't be a coward now.
How long? How long can one go on like this? How long, how long? If Devdatta notices,
It was very interesting because Satyadev Dubey did it with Amol Palekar and Amrish Puri and Sunil Pradhan. Beautiful, very sexy. And Karnad did it with the local actress and a very good actress here. What do you remember when you ask them? From Karnad's production, I remember the songs. They've become part of the Kannada lore. The songs he used, the music he brought, and the colorful movement he brought, that kind of thing. From Satyadev Dubey's production, what you remember, Amrish Puri, Amol Palekar, Sunil Pradhan. He created characters. So there were totally different approaches to the play. Hayavadana is remembered for different reasons in Delhi, and by Bangalore. So in fact, the two of them emphasize two different aspects of what we call traditional theatre.
You know, Girish is very sure that the success of Hayavadana had a lot to do with these two productions, Karnad's and Dubey's. So Shanta, but what did Hayavadana really do for what was happening in Indian theatre at that time? Did it actually influence subsequent plays, subsequent productions?
So, how do we talk about influence? Influence can be aping, which we don't expect from original playwrights. Influence is also being acquainted anew with the possibilities of theatre. So Hayavadana did that. Karanth and Dubey had two very different approaches to Hayavadana. I've seen both productions. You see how they're part of the two histories of theatre, the two trajectories from which they come. Karnataka has this very strong traditional theatre influence. It has company theatre on one side, Yakshagana on the other. Now, Bombay didn't have that. Bombay was a city, just became a city, and it was heavily influenced by realism. And it was Dubey's mode. So he approached Hayavadana from the psychology, etc., which is why I think in Bombay, the fact that people loved the play was on this account that they could relate to those characters and their human situation as real and also modern.
Here, people like Lankesh, in an effort to be modern, you know what they were doing? They were imitating Look Back in Anger. So, Lankesh wrote 2 or 3 plays where a man comes and abuses his sister and had long speeches, and it's all straight John Osborne. Because one was only looking at the West. I was lucky that Karanth was there, to spark this on. He created another modernity. Because we had no stage. There's nothing to experiment on. Only what we talk to each other.
Such vehemence, no? When Girish says, we had no stage. What does he mean when he's saying that? Sunil, what do you think he means?
Perhaps what Girish is talking about is that historical moment post-independence, that it's a new country, a new nation that's come out of colonialism, and there is a urgent need to find a new identity, in the theatre. What can be defined as Indian theatre? And it's always posited against the colonial experience and the colonial influences. So they were really laying that ground in a sense. Looking to Indian tradition, looking to modernity, trying to find, ideas from the past, from tradition, blending them with their new understanding of this identity, trying to forge that identity. I think it must have been a very, very exciting period. I mean, in fact, I quite envy, because you're, in a sense, a pioneers.
In a sense, you're one of the most direct inheritors of this pioneering tradition. I mean, you worked with Satyadev Dubey from when you were a teenager, and many of us believe, of course, that Dubey was one of Girish's most effective collaborators, and he was a close friend. So was Karanth, of course. So how do you relate to this larger tradition?
It's interesting that, the later generations, like my generation and, the present generation, I wonder if we really look back enough, because we've really got a stage set for us, that we are part of something that happened 75 years ago, and we've got a stage set for us. Do we really look back to that moment? Do we really try and understand that moment and draw inspiration from it? Figure out where we fit into this whole idea of identity, of an Indian theatre, post-colonial expression. I don't know if we do it enough, actually.
The main problem is theatre came to India from the West, modern theatre. I mean, we had traditional theatre, okay, but what we call modern theatre, proscenium, lights, tickets, people coming to buy tickets, watching plays, all this. All that came in the 19th century. Came to really with the Parsis in Bombay and then Calcutta. You see, because and uh, they took Shakespeare, they did Khune Khunan, all that. Anything Shakespeare, Hamlet, and they loved Shakespeare. What we call character comes to us from Shakespeare, not from the sciences. Not from the sciences. Indians didn't learn character from sciences. I mean, those who learned psychology may have learned. But our notion of character, if you look at Sanskrit Natya Shastra and so on, there are 4 kinds of men. Dhirodatta, Dhira Prada, there were 8 kinds of women. And they had to fit into them. They were just categories. There was no subtlety involved in it at all. This complexity comes really from trying to come to terms. Do you know that, and this you see particularly in Marathi theatre of the 1880s when it started. Shakuntal, which is the first Marathi play to become a big commercial success. It's supposed to be an adaptation of Shakuntala. Okay. Of course, it's Shakuntal done in the Brahmini fashion. They all speak Brahmini Marathi, dress up Brahmin. So, so it became a huge success. In the introduction to Saubhadra, this man Kirloskar, who wrote Shakuntal, he says, I want to catch rasa in the English fashion. English paddhatichi rasa nirmiti mala havi hai. So even there he knew that, Natya Shastra, this didn't really, and he really worked at that. That by that he meant, of course, English was, he was looking at the Parsi theatre that was going on at that time in Bombay. Another super example is Gadkari was a playwright, young playwright. He loved Shakespeare, and he wanted to write in his lifetime 18 Shakespeare plays. He said he wanted to write 18 plays because he knew he was only half as good as Shakespeare. This is the colonial, Shakespeare had done it and you can use it for your purposes. I broke away from it. I learned the techniques and so on, but I never once adapted a play.
Wow, Girish has said a lot here. But I want to come back to one of the things he said about 20th century playwriting in India. Shanta, do you agree that the character in the modern Indian play has come to us from Shakespeare?
Not totally, because I think at the time when Shakespeare was being adapted into Marathi, for instance, then what our playwrights learned from Shakespeare was that your hero, although he could be brave and a warrior, didn't have to be all white and shiny. Because Shakespeare had given them heroes, even historical figures, who were many shades of white, black, and gray. And that is why they were able to shade their historical and mythological characters to some extent in that way, but always under the control of the audience, because the audience would tolerate only so much departure from legend and no more. So always in what people can do in theatre, we have to take the community and the audience into consideration. So we have Shakespeare at a certain point. We have Natya Shastra on the other side. Where does the modern character come from? It comes from Ibsen, and they are dealing with things, situations of their time, the society and the politics of their time. And when the Marathi playwright tried to emulate Ibsen, for instance, they had to negotiate this. They couldn't bring Doll's House as was to the Marathi stage because, again, what would be acceptable to the Marathi audience? Character comes from modern realistic play. Girish comes from Shirshi and Dharwad. Women do not or did not at one time come out. I come from Bombay, and the reason why I can claim realistic theatre as my theatre is because our women sit in drawing rooms and talk about family affairs.
But Girish is not done. He has lots more to say about how modern Indian theatre developed in this country.
We had been taught by colonialism that we were secondary. And we had imbibed that. So that automatically, look at the plays written by that time. They were all adaptations. Look at the plays. I mean, look at Purla Deshpande, considered Tuza Hai Tuza Pashi. All adaptations. Sundarmi Onar is Barretts of Empire. They're all very second-rate, popular English plays adapted. Never look at your own society. In Kannada, there is Parvatvani. All his plays were adaptation. And this is what Kambar and I were accused of. We were accused of destroying new talent by being original, by scaring them off. Because it was easy to take an English play and adapt it. And they didn't even acknowledge whose play it was. I mean, plagiarism was rampant.
Girish is really quite agitated about these adaptations of Western plays. And I'm going to suggest that this also refers partially to his lament about not having a stage. Perhaps what he meant is that his generation had no stage that they could call their own. I mean, Girish was clearly seeking a modern stage for his own work, an urban stage that spoke specifically to Indian modernity as this new nation found its identity and its voice. Let's examine what he says about plagiarism. Shanta, Sunil, was that true from what you know?
I wouldn't talk in terms of period. I talk in terms of places. Now, I know that Bengali theatre was constantly moaning about not having original playwriting. Then in Karnataka, whatever you may think of Adyarangacharya or Kailasam, they were writing original plays. They were not adaptations. And certainly in Bombay and Pune, there were no adaptations. Now, for Bombay, Girish picks up Pula Deshpande. Now, Pula was never really considered a serious playwright. I mean, he was a humorist. Basically, he liked entertaining people. You can see that PL didn't really have his own theatre ideology, and therefore also knocked ideology out of every play that he translated. Precht, Teen Paisha's Tamasha, is a musical entertainer. So we can't take Pula Deshpande as an example of Marathi theatre, because there was so much original writing happening in Maharashtra, Pune, and even outside places like Solapur and Beed and what have you, because it's a whole tradition of play writing. We really can't talk about Indian theatre, Indian modern theatre, Indian modern urban theatre. We really have to specify Marathi theatre, Kannada theatre, Bengali theatre, and so on.
Okay, let's come to Bombay in the 1950s. Bombay already was and remains a major theatre centre in this country. Girish lived in Bombay as a young man when he was doing his master's degree, and those years exposed him to a kind of theatre that he had never seen before.
People don't realize what a seminal moment it was that Al-Qazi chose to come to India. He was in Bombay, and he ran his theatre unit. It's in Bombay that I saw Al-Qazi's Bombay productions. And then he used to have workshops for university professors, during vacations and so on. When I was in my second year, he had a workshop on Antigone, about Antigone, for our teachers. And one of the teachers called W.W.S. Bhaskar went there and came back. And Bhaskar had no clue about theatre. But Bhaskar brought vocabulary like exit and composition and that kind of thing into our heart. And Bhaskar did a reading of Antigone. No, Bhaskar was not capable of really directing. So it didn't go very far. But I read a good play. Suddenly I know, my God, this is what playwriting is, not the Kannada plays as I was doing.
How important was Al-Qazi in the 1950s and early 60s in Bombay? Did his ideas and methods have an impact on theatre all over the country?
No, already he didn't, because he was a Bombay person, and Pune Bombay person, as a matter of fact, and London person. His karma bhumi, so to say, was in South Bombay. So, in terms of performances, except for in instances like Girish coming from outside watching his plays, nobody else in Bombay was watching Al-Qazi's plays. Only the South Bombay crowd and a small part of that South Bombay crowd. But his influence, as Girish illustrates quite rightly, came through his training. And his training was attended by Dubey, by Vijay Mehta, and both of whom didn't say eye to eye and did different kinds of theatre. But they went out and did that much theatre. And Dubey's influence has passed on, and Vijay Mehta's has passed on. So, in that sense, you can talk of Al-Qazi as a Mool Purush.
Yeah, so my introduction to Al-Qazi was through Dubai when I joined him in 74, 75. And, around Dubai, Al-Qazi, the way he presented Al-Qazi was like he was the villain of the piece. Okay, everything that Dubai did was against whatever Al-Qazi, so it was that, and the fact that Al-Qazi was the NSD, so LSD was a villainous institution, etc. But many, many years later, there was a wonderful exhibition on Al-Qazi's work at the National Gallery of Modern Art in Mumbai, and it really traced his entire evolution as a director with beautiful, images and photographs and set designs. But what struck me in that exhibition was the way he looked at theatre as a larger idea, that theatre was not just performance, but it was also art appreciation, it was training, it was knowledge, and it was really, in a sense, a larger view of life in the theatre. Okay, and that struck me because at that very point of time, even in our own practice, we were arriving at the same thing. And then I looked back and I thought again about what we did with Dubey, and there was a lot of that kind of informal learning. Dubey's insistence in the early days, the importance he gave to reading about theatre, about ideas about theatre, which later on he just kind of started dismissing. But in his early days, we went through all that. And then the question that came to me was that what if Al-Qazi had not left Bombay and gone to NSD? Of course, with Dubey and Al-Qazi in the same city, I think it might have been really, really very, very dramatic. But in a way, I'm glad that Al-Qazi left and went to the NSD because that created space in theatre unit for Dubey to take over after Al-Qazi. And Dubey enters theatre unit and he brings with him his strong sense of language, of in Indian language. So he begins with translations and adaptations of, European plays, but slowly and very surely he starts moving to original writing in Hindi. And I think in a sense, Andhayug was a major milestone in that direction.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, no? I mean, not all significant plays were so easily produced in this increasingly diverse theatre community.
There was a competition held, Commonwealth Plays competition in London, with this man, Kannada, being one of the jury, and Pratap Sharma's Touch of Brightness is selected. Now, Touch of Brightness is about the red light district of Bombay. And what happens to a woman there? It was sent to Alec sent it. It was selected. And Alec, as usual, decided he was going to do it. So what he did was immediately, hush, hush, hush. No one was going to know what it was about. They were going to rehearse in secret and go and so on. Instead, it all became full-blown. India's reputation is being ruined as and the Pula Deshpande was involved in banning it. And Pratap actually got a stroke because he was looking forward to that. Yeah. Pratap was another typical upper middle class man with a great deal of talent who was doing everything to prove to the British that we can do it. And his intention in writing this play was also to take it to England. That is typical of the, everyone was interested in proving to the West, because the West was very much there. And as I told you yesterday, the Madras Dramatics Association did not admit Indians into their cast. They only did it to the, Englishmen.
That's quite something, no, Shanta? What Girish says, that certain people writing in English at that time were doing it to impress the West. He speaks of Pratap Sharma, but you and I are both great fans of Asif Karimboy's work. And is this even a way to understand the theatre that they were doing, that they're trying to impress the West, or are they really doing something else?
I think when people attain Girish's status, even against their better judgment, they often generalize. And I think when he talks about playwrights or theatre people in general, he is really not looking at people like Asif Karimboy, such a brilliant playwright. And he got some recognition back home only after his plays were performed in America. That, I think, is colonialism in the heart. Because we waited for a play to be praised by an American critic before it got its one and only staging here in India, which happened in Delhi. So Girish is only looking at a certain set of people writing or doing theatre in Bombay. And elsewhere, other things are happening which he disregards. So I would put that down as a generalization that holds no water at all.
So, Sunil, you think we've transcended this colonial moment finally, the colonialism of the heart and the mind? Has it left us?
Well, actually, I think it exists now, perhaps in a different form, and because of the idea of globalization, the issue is not as sharp as it was perhaps earlier. But there is a substantial theatre practice in India that seeks and gets its validation from the West, from Europe especially, not even other parts of South Asia. And audience building in India is not easy. I know this from personal experience. It is very hard work, but it just has to be done in the larger interest. That's one point where you have to step out, and stop thinking about yourself as much as a larger idea. You're actually contributing to that. And if you don't choose to do that, and instead, if your gaze is westward, then I'm sorry to say, if that is not a form of colonialism, then what is?
For all of his unhappiness about adaptation and plagiarism, Girish was actually very open to theatre from all over the world, and he was profoundly open to its suggestions and its influences.
I borrowed heavily, of course. Lorca, I went through Lorca. I was obsessed with Lorca. Brecht. I was, at that time, mocked it all the time. He also borrows. Okay. So I said, so I borrow. And the moment I started writing a historical play, I would immediately read all in the West, here, there. and see what I can get from it, become as good as. That coolness, and as Ramanujan quite correctly once pointed out to me, to most Kannada writers and Indian writers, his rival is within that linguistic circle. You don't think of the person outside there, which I learned from him to do. Someone writing in England, he writes a history play. What kind of a history play does he write?
And what kind of history play does Girish choose to write? I'll give you one guess.
The production that has made tremendous influence was, of course, Al-Qazi's Tughlaq. The National School of Drama was looking for a play to do in Urdu. And a friend of mine called Karnad, B.V. Karnad, who was a student of the National School of Drama, translated it for Al-Qazi. And it was done in 1967 in Delhi. And it was a huge success. I immediately became accepted as a national player, but it was done in Urdu, not in. In the meantime, Satyadev Dubey had read my Kannada play, got it translated, Yayati, and he produced that. That was a success.
Tughlaq catapulted Girish to the national stage, but again we see the hands of Dubey and Karant at work. Dubey had just discovered Yayati, Karant had translated Tughlaq overnight almost, as Girish told us. So we really cannot underestimate the importance of these two collaborators and friends in the early years of Girish's theatre career. Shanta, do you really think Tughlaq is a great play?
It's an amazing play. It sort of breathes theatre. I think with a lot of Girish's plays, this is true. In that sense, I would say he has this kind of theatre in him, which is why he dismisses realistic theatre, because you can read a realistic play and yet not see it, yet not hear it or visualize it.
Let's listen to an excerpt from the play. Tughlaq was published in English in 1972. Sachin Gurjale reads the part of Shahabuddin, Kafil Jafri is the minister, and Pritam Koil Pillai is the sultan.
How did you guess?
Do you really want to know?
You aren't worried about hurting my feelings, are you?
There was a letter in my letter room today. A strange letter. Strange because, unlike all the others, it didn't abuse me. And it was signed by Ratan Singh.
Do you really think I'll believe that? It's the oldest trick in the world.
Why should I lie to a dead man?
But does he say why he's doing this to me?
He has disappeared without a trace.
Let me ask you something. Why did you go against me? What wrong have I done you?
What's the point? You won't understand it anyway.
Oh, won't I? Or could it be that you don't know?
Get on with your killing, Muhammad. Or does your hand refuse to rise against me? Beware. You won't be able to trap me with your wiles. I'm not Ainul Mulk to live crushed under your kindness. You want to solve all your problems in the flash of a dagger, don't you? But you can't stop this uprising now. My father distrusts you, and I've already written to him about everything here. Everything.
Sorry, but Ratan Singh has sent those letters to us.
Where will you hide my corpse? How will you gag my voice? Kill me. But you won't stop this. This will go on.
I could have killed you with a word, but I like you too much. Why must this happen, Bharani? Are all those I trust condemned to go down in history as traitors? What is happening? Tell me, Bharani, will my reign be nothing more than a tortured scream which will stab the night and melt away in the silence? Najib, See that every man involved in this is caught and beheaded. Stuff their bodies with straw and hang them up in the palace yard. Let them hang there for a week. No, send them round my kingdom. Let every one of my subjects see them. Let everyone see.
I would have loved to have done Tughlaq if I had the resources to mount that. I think it's a brilliant play. But then instead I chose to do Taledanda. See, that play had been sitting in my head for about 3 years. It struck me when I read the play that it was a wonderful exploration of the whole historical moment of the Bhakti period. And it's one of those moments in history where it's so critical for us to know what was attempted and why and how it actually failed. And it's tragic the way it kind of collapses around. And Basavana's own politics are so critical for us to understand, especially in contemporary times. So this is the wonderful thing about Girish Karnad, that he would write these pieces placed in a historical moment, but they spoke to us so immediately, truly political in that sense.
This has been a long and tightly packed episode, and that should give us some indication of how much was happening in theatre in the 50s and 60s in Bombay and, of course, elsewhere in the country. We've talked a lot about how different the sensibilities of writing and making theatre were for this new generation who really claimed the post-independence stage. We've looked at how it might be more accurate to speak of several theatre centres rather than a single space or a single language of theatre making. And we've considered the larger contexts in which Girish did his early work and the people who gave it shape and performance. Join us for part 2 of The Making of Indian Theatre, where Shanta Gokhale and Sunil Shanbag share more of what they saw and did in Bombay and give us deeper insights into Girish's position as the country's preeminent playwright. You have been listening to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. We thank the Nilekhani Philanthropies for supporting this series, Pallavi MD and Konarak Reddy for the original music, Gokul Abhishek, Gaurav Krishna, and the Bangalore studio for sound recording and engineering. At the Bangalore International Centre, our thanks to Lekha Naidu, Raghu Tenkaila, Saraswati MP, S. Sarvanna Raj, Rajashekhar BN, Manas Sampath, and of course, V. Ravichandran. Ajay Krishnan, Sunil Shanbag, Vinod Ravindran, and Vivek Madan, thank you for being there when we needed you. Thank you also, Vivek Shanbag and Shanta Gokhale. Our special thanks to the Karnad family. Anmol Tikku and myself, Arshia Sattar, have put these episodes together from conversations that we had with Girish Karnad in June 2019.